Today, we build a diorama from Tamiya's 1/72nd scale A6M1 Seiran float plane. The kit and the extras were received earlier in a What's on My Bench video, see the link here. Now, this is my first Tamiya airplane kit. I've done a lot of their armor kits before, and I can tell you I was really blown away with the crispness of the parts, the level of detail, and the construction. It kind of just fell together like their armor kits do. Like all airplane kits, assembly starts with the cockpit. I primed all the interior parts with Vallejo's Aichi green, which was the color of the Japanese corrosion control substance they used during the war. Over this, I used the standard German colors of RLM 66, a dark gray, lightened with a little RLM 02 gray interior to give the interior color its own unique color and to make it look less like the German airplanes that the instructions called out. I will have to say, Tamiya's selection of colors was a little odd, but we'll make it work. After this dried, I picked out the few details that were in the cockpit in reds, whites, and blacks before adding the required 12 grams, or about half an ounce in normal units, to the nose to keep it from being a tail sitter. I had a collection of old watch parts left over from a very old modeling project, and I just used those. What I did is I just filled the nose up with the watch bits until I found a level balance point around the wing roots. The whole lot was then fixed in place with a liberal application of superglue. Once all that was dry, it was time to move on to the wings, which fit together rather well. The two body halves were next, along with the tail tip and the horizontal stabilizers. With the cockpit and body glued up and set, there were some external engine components that needed to be added: a radiator and a shroud. The pre-assembled wings and lower body were to be added together next. And I'll be truthful here in saying that this method of assembly always gives me pause, as it usually ends up with a large gap on one side or the other where the wing roots meet the fuselage, on the top side, of course. In this case, the fit was quite nice. No filler was required. There isn't any landing gear, as it's a float plane, and the floats were made from 4 parts each. Quick little design build tip here. I actually started the entire assembly with the wooden carriage that is used to move the plane around. This turned out to be a bonus, as I used it to set the float plane in place while the glue cured, thus keeping their alignment correct. Once everything had a chance to cure, it was time to prime and look for areas to correct. There were a few, but for the most part, it was a fairly clean build. Again, I wanted to try my hand at hand painting on the national insignia, especially since the Japanese use basically red dots. I cut the circle templates using the Cricut cutter. All the striping was cut from masking tape using a cutting guide. I started with white paint over the gray primer for all the white outlines, the tail stripes, and a base color for the yellow. I also sprayed the floats where they were needed. Here we can see the red masking applied, and then the red paint painted over that masking, and finally the mask removed and the oversized final sizing white ring masks put in place. And then spray the entire bottom of the airplane with the bottom color that the Imperial Japanese Navy used for most of their airplanes. I think they called it bamboo. Once all the bottom color had cured and dried, I taped it off, and it was time for the top camo color, which in this case is a deep green color, which I chose to lighten slightly by adding a few drops of light gray paint to the green to take that factory fresh color off the airplane. And here's the big reveal, always my favorite part after painting. Pulling off all the masking tape, we can see even the little waves I did on the side came out. Very happy with what I got. soldier painting. These resin NIJ soldiers from Numodel are 1/72nd scale, but come with a lot of individual character for each model. They're all one-piece designs, and I noticed only one had a slight molding defect. His satchel is missing. A quick fix with some 2-part epoxy and we're off to priming. I started my painting process with skin tones, just using several thin layers of Vallejo's medium skin. This gives us a warmish yellow-brown color that looks like Asian skin tone that's a little more on the tan side, like these guys would be hanging out in the jungle. For the uniforms, I used a mix of khaki and green and ochre green and ochre brown to make various shades of browns and brown greens. Some off-whites for those few t-shirts and lighter tans for the gear and webbing. 1/72nd figures are pretty simple to paint. They are small and the details are just as small, so they paint up quickly. And with a quick wash, we were done. It's always amazing how much a dark wash can tie together those bright colors that you put on initially. But then I guess most uniforms in World War II ended up the dirt or mud color of the theater of war they are in. Luckily, each nation has a different shaped helmet so you can tell them apart. Building the diorama base, I knew I was going to be using resin and having the plane float. So I started with a chunk of 2-inch foam and started carving an inlet. My thought process was a beach scene. Operation Haikuri was one of the last operations for the Japanese armed forces in World War II. The operation was designed to strike at America's carrier fleet that was getting ever closer to the home island, but it was canceled with the surrender of the empire after the second nuclear bomb was dropped. My imagined fate for this very late war plane was that it was being transferred to some remote atoll for pilot training while waiting for orders to begin the operation against the American carrier fleets. And then the stand-down orders came, and they are now preparing the plane to be taken out and scuttled. After carving the foam, I added some plaster to protect the foam, gave it a black bond with PVA and black acrylic paint mixture, and a quick brown base coat with a spray can. And so it was time for some sand. I used Vallejo's desert sand. I used a damp china brush to spread the texture paste evenly, and it also added some texture to the texture paste with those rough bristles. The color is a little more yellowish than I wanted, and it looked monotoned, and it needed some depth. So I diluted some speed paint and made it into a wash. Anyhow, it's now time to pour some resin. But first, we have to put up the dams. I poured the resin in layers. One reason for this was to make sure that the dams are not leaking, and the second reason is because I wanted the plane to sit in the water, but not sit on the bottom or not sit on top of the water, if that makes any sense. So after the first pour, I superglued the plane in place. Then I poured more resin up to the midlines of the float, so it looks like the plane has some weight and it's sunk down in the water, but still floating. After removal of the dams, it was time to add some waves in the form of matte acrylic medium. I followed this up, after the matte acrylic medium dried overnight, with some glossy Mod Podge to make the little ripples in between the waves. I had some palm trees in my bits box, so those got added along with some lichen, which I added flock to make it more like jungle foliage and bushes. And the palm trees had previously gotten repainted with browns for the trunk and various shades of green for the leaves, so it looked less plasticky. After adding all the jungle bits, it was time to get these guys added. I used the wooden cradle as a place to have most of the soldiers just kind of hanging out. I took the two officer types and put them down near the water's edge, kind of looking out to sea. This was a fun little build. It was also fun learning the history of the plane and the whole process, playing with resin, using desert medium sand to actually building the airplane and actually painting on most of the national insignias. Just made it for an all-around nice experience. And I can't say enough about how well the Tamiya kit just kind of fell together. It really made it an easy, fun thing to build. So until next time, happy hobbying.